What happens when the past, once buried, suddenly stretches its hand into the present? That was the storm inside Tieu Ca's heart the moment she saw her daughter, Tieu Han, running freely toward Can, the man who had abandoned them years ago. The little girl's laughter echoed in the courtyard, pure and innocent, while Can bent down to embrace her. To anyone watching, it looked like a tender reunion between father and child. But to Tieu Ca, every second was a knife twisting inside her chest. How could Han, who once cried herself to sleep asking why she didn't have a father like the other children, suddenly smile so brightly in front of the very man who left them behind? The confusion was unbearable. Her hands trembled, torn between rushing forward to pull Han away and standing frozen, as if her legs had turned to stone. Can's voice was smooth, almost gentle. Han, you've grown so much. Daddy missed you. The word daddy pierced Tieu Ca. For years, the title had been an empty space, a wound she had carried alone while raising her child. Now Can dared to claim it so easily, as if absence and neglect could be erased with a single word. Han, still too young to understand the weight of the past, clung to him with innocent excitement. Mommy, look, Daddy is here. Tieu Ca's lips parted, but no words came. Her heart was a battlefield of anger, sorrow, and fear. She wanted to scream that this man was no father. That love wasn't something you returned to after abandoning it yet. When she saw the sparkle in Han's eyes, a sparkle she had never seen before, her resolve wavered. Later that night, when Han had fallen asleep, Tieu Ca sat by the window, the moonlight casting shadows on her tired face. Her mind replayed the scene again and again. The joy in Han's smile, the softness in Can's tone, the unbearable ache in her own chest. Was she being selfish for wanting to keep Can away? Or was she protecting her daughter from a man who might hurt her again? Her heart whispered one truth. She was terrified of losing the bond she had built with Han, terrified that Can's sudden presence could shatter the fragile world they had fought so hard to create. The following days felt like walking on a tightrope for Tieu Ca. Every morning, Han's questions became sharper, innocent yet piercing. Mommy, when will Daddy come again? Can I play with him more? Each word pulled at Tieu Ca's chest. She wanted to protect her daughter, to keep her safe from disappointment. But Han's smile when she spoke of Can was something Tieu Ca couldn't ignore. Can, aware of Han's curiosity, wasted no time. He appeared with shiny toys, colorful dresses, and promises that sparkled brighter than the gifts themselves. To Han, it felt like a dream. The father she had never known was suddenly real, present, and attentive. One afternoon, Can arrived with a large teddy bear almost bigger than Han herself. She hugged it tightly, her laughter filling the small house. Tieu Ca stood at the doorway, her arms crossed, her heart torn in two. Can, you can't just buy her love, she said sharply. He turned, his smile still plastered on his face. I'm not buying anything, Ca. I'm simply giving my daughter what she deserves. Don't you think she has the right to know her father? The word right stung her. Where had this concern been when Han was a newborn? When Tieu Ca had cried alone? When nights had been filled with hunger and worry? She clenched her fists, but before she could answer, Han tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, Daddy is so kind. Why are you angry? Her voice broke inside. How could she explain abandonment to a child too young to grasp betrayal? How could she tell Han that kindness now did not erase cruelty before? That night, after Can left, Tieu Ca sat at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. The weight was too heavy. She feared losing her daughter, not to love, but to illusions. It was then that the door creaked open and Han stepped in. He had seen the gifts piled in the corner, the way Han's eyes sparkled whenever she mentioned Can. Sitting beside Tieu Ca, he didn't say a word at first. Instead, he reached for her trembling hand and held it firmly. Finally, in a quiet voice, he said, Ca, he may be her father by blood, but love is proven by staying. You've stayed, you've fought, Don't forget that." Her tears spilled at those words. For the first time in days, she felt she wasn't standing alone in this storm. Hung's presence was an anchor, steady against the tide of Can's sudden return. But deep inside, she knew the real battle hadn't even begun. The storm finally arrived. Can filed a petition at the court, demanding visitation rights and hinting at custody. The papers, thick with legal terms, lay on Tieu Ca's wooden table like a weapon. Her hands trembled as she traced the ink, her vision blurring with tears. "He wants to take her," she whispered, her voice breaking. Hung stood beside her, his jaw clenched, his body tense like a bowstring ready to snap. He gently took the papers from her trembling hands and placed them aside. "He may think money and blood give him power," Hung said, his voice steady. "But the truth is, Han's home is with you, with us." Those words wrapped around her like a shield, yet fear still gnawed at her heart. Would the law see the nights she had cradled Han through fever, the mornings she had walked her to school in the rain, or would it see only Can's wealth, his sudden performance of fatherhood? Days later, in the sterile courtroom, the tension was unbearable. Can's lawyer spoke with sharp precision, painting him as a man reformed, eager to love and raise his daughter. Tieu Ca sat silently, her heart pounding, as though each word stole a piece of her motherhood. When it was her turn, her lawyer urged her to speak. She rose, her voice unsteady at first, but then steadier as her truth poured out. "I don't deny Han deserves to know her father," she said, her eyes flicking briefly toward Can. "But where was he when she cried in the night? Where was he when we had no food, when she begged for warmth? A father is not made in a courtroom. A father is made by love, by sacrifice, by presence." The room fell silent. Even the judge paused, his pen still over the paper. At that moment, Han, seated at the back with Hung, suddenly slipped from his hand and ran forward. She clutched Tieu Ca's leg tightly, her small voice ringing clear. "Mommy, I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to stay with you." The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. Can's face stiffened, his smile faltering. Hung, though silent, felt his chest swell with pride and pain. He wished he could claim the title, father. But for now, it was enough that Han's heart knew where she belonged. Outside the courtroom, Tieu Ca collapsed onto a bench, her body shaking. Hung sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "No matter what happens," he murmured, "I'll fight with you. Always." She leaned against him, her tears soaking his shirt, and whispered, "I'm so afraid." "Hung, what if they take her away?" His grip tightened. "Then we fight harder. Because you're not alone anymore." The court's decision favored Tieu Ca. Primary custody remained with her. Walken was granted limited visitation under supervision. Relief washed over her like rain after drought. But the victory carried no joy. She knew Can, a man who had once abandoned without guilt, would not accept defeat so easily. In the following weeks, he lingered on the edges of their lives. He appeared at Han's school gates, his expensive car gleaming like a statement of power. He sent more gifts, boxes stacked at their door, each one a silent reminder that he wasn't going away. Han, innocent and curious, accepted them with wide eyes. "Mommy, Daddy brought me another doll. Can I keep it?" Tieu Ca forced a smile, her heart twisting. She didn't want to crush Han's joy, but she feared how easily Can's attention could weave illusions. It was Hung who stepped in with quiet firmness. One evening, after Han had gone to bed clutching her new doll, he turned to Tieu Ca. "If you don't draw the line, he'll take more than just her smile. He'll take her heart." Her eyes filled with tears. "But how do I protect her without breaking her? She doesn't understand his past. She only sees him now." Hung cupped her face gently, his gaze steady. "Then let me stand with you. She doesn't need the whole truth yet, but she needs consistency. Gifts fade. What remains is who tucks her in at night, who stays when the storms come. That's us, Ca." His words struck deep, like a promise she desperately needed. Days later, An unexpected moment shifted everything. Han came home from school with her drawing book. Excitedly, she flipped to a page and showed Tieu Ca and Hung. "Look, this is our family." In her picture, she had drawn herself in the middle, holding hands with Mommy and Uncle Hung. Ken was nowhere on the page. Tieu Ca's throat tightened. "Han, why didn't you draw your father?" The little girl shrugged, her eyes innocent. "Because Daddy doesn't stay. But Uncle Hung, he's always here." The silence after those words was thick with unspoken emotion. Tieu Ca looked at Hung, who sat frozen, his eyes glistening. Han tilted her head, then asked softly, "Mommy, can I call Uncle Hung Dad?" Tieu Ca's heart stopped. Hung inhaled sharply, as though her tiny question had pierced straight through him. He didn't answer right away, afraid of overstepping, but the longing in his eyes said everything. Tieu Ca pulled Han into her arms, her tears falling into her daughter's hair. She whispered, her voice breaking, "If that's what your heart feels, then yes, you can." Han giggled, throwing her arms around Hung. "Daddy." For the first time, Hung allowed himself to smile fully, a smile that carried both joy and fear. Joy, because Han had chosen him. Fear, because he knew Ken would not let this go unnoticed. The story of Tieu Ca, Han, Ken, and Hung teaches us that love is not defined by blood, but by presence, sacrifice, and consistency. A biological parent may hold a title, but if they abandon their child, that emptiness cannot be filled by gifts or sudden returns. What children truly remember are the simple moments. Who holds their hand when they are scared? Who listens when they cry? Who stays day after day? Tieu Ca's struggle shows the weight of a mother's heart, protecting her child, while carrying the pain of the past. Hung's quiet devotion reminds us that real fatherhood is not claimed. It is earned through patience, care, and unwavering support. Han's innocent words, choosing to call Hung Dad, reveal the pure wisdom of a child. They see truth more clearly than adults. Ultimately, the lesson is this: family is not built by blood alone, but by loyalty, love, and the courage to stay.